Hello, let's continue reading The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. In my last read, it is a rather simple chapter, chapter 8, regarding regarding leaders who acquired the kingdom via evil, via pure evil, nefarious conducts. And Machiavelli gave two examples: Agathocles, the king of Syracuse, and Oliverotto, which was the leader of a small city called Fermo. The former, Agathocles, was a complete tyrant. He just basically ransacked, plundered every single place, and killed all the oligarchs initially in Sicily, and rose to power. And not only that, basically, I researched about him on Wikipedia. His Wikipedia entry is rather short. I'm not too sure whether because he was from a really early era, and therefore there aren't much written records about him. But basically, his entire biography was talking about all the people he killed tyrannically, uh, all the people he despoiled ruthlessly. And the reason, Machiavelli said, the reason why, because normally for a leader, for a king, if you kill people mercilessly, nefariously, there would be some repercussions. For example, your citizens would be disgusted, might revolt, they are appalled. But also at the same time, you could argue that if you are heinous enough, then the citizens would be so appalled to the extent that they would not even cackle for a second. And was what Machiavelli said, because he extolled Agathocles for having committed his evil very quickly in only one blow, and hence, uh, first of all, people, his denizens probably were so afraid of him, and secondly, people would quickly forget about all those atrocities. And hence, Machiavelli said, for injuries ought to be done all at one time, so that being tasted less. So bad things, atrocious, awful things must be done very quickly, very deeply in one blow. And meanwhile, the other person, Oliverotto, was also an incredibly wicked person. He was so wily. Uh, he he lured his uncle to organize a banquet to invite him for dinner. But in the banquet itself, he hit his soldiers, and all the hidden soldiers quickly came out and killed his uncle, and he gained power. But I'm not too sure about the eventual fate of Oliverotto. Yeah. Okay, it's a rather simple chapter. I will move on to another chapter called Chapter 9, concerning a civil principality. But coming to the other point, where a leading citizen becomes the prince of his country not by weakness or any intolerable violence, but by favor of his fellow citizens. This may be called a civil principality, nor is genius or fortune altogether necessary to attain to it, but rather a happy shrewdness. I say then that such a principality is obtained either by the favor of the people or by the favor of the nobles, because in all cities these two distinct parties are found, and from this it arises that the people do not wish to be ruled nor oppressed by the nobles, and the nobles wish to rule and oppress the people. And from these two opposite desires there arises in cities one of the three results, either a principality, self-government, or anarchy. A principality is created either by the people or by the nobles, accordingly as one or other of them has the opportunity. For the nobles, seeing they cannot withstand the people, begin to cry up the reputation of one of themselves, and they make him a prince, so that under his shadow they can give vent to their ambitions. The people, finding they cannot resist the nobles, also cry up the reputation of one of themselves, and make him a prince so as to be defended by his authority. He who obtains sovereignty by the assistance of the nobles maintains himself with more difficulty than he who comes to it by the aid of the people, because the former finds himself with many around him who consider themselves his equals, and because of this he can neither rule nor manage them to his liking. But he who reaches sovereignty by popular favor finds himself alone and has none around him, or few, who are not prepared to obey him. Besides this, one cannot by fair dealing and without injury to others satisfy the nobles, but you can satisfy the people, for their object is more righteous than that of the nobles, the latter wishing to oppress while the former only desire not to be oppressed. It is to be added also that a prince can never secure himself against a hostile people, because of their being too many, whilst from the nobles he can secure himself, as they are few in number. The worst that a prince may expect from a hostile people is to be abandoned by them, but from hostile nobles he has not only to fear abandonment, but also that they will rise against him, for they being in these affairs more far-seeing and astute, always come forward in time to save themselves, and to obtain favors from him whom they expect to prevail. Further, the prince is compelled to live always with the same people, but he can do well without the same nobles, being able to make and unmake them daily, and to give or wake away authority when it pleases him. Therefore, to make this point clearer, I say that the nobles ought to be looked at mainly in two ways. That is to say, they either shape their course in such a way as binds them entirely to your fortune, or they do not. Those who so bind themselves are not rapacious ought to be honored and loved. Those who do not bind themselves may be dealt with in two ways. They may fail to do this through pusillanimity and a natural want of courage, in which case you ought to make use of them, especially of those who are of good counsel. And thus, whilst in prosperity you honor them, in adversity you do not have to fear them. But when for their own ambitious ends they shun binding themselves, it is a token that they are giving more thought to themselves than to you. And a prince ought to guard against such, and to fear them as if they were open enemies, because in adversity they always help to ruin him. Therefore one who becomes a prince through the favor of the people ought to keep them friendly, and this he can easily do, seeing they only ask not to be oppressed by him. But one who, in opposition to the people, becomes a prince by the favor of the nobles, ought above everything to seek to win the people over to himself, and this he may easily do if he takes them under his protection, because men, when they receive good from him of whom they were expecting evil, are bound more closely to their benefactor. Thus the people quickly become more devoted to him than if he had been raised to the principality by their favors. I digress. At the beginning in this chapter 9, when Machiavelli was saying that there are two kinds of leaders that are elected by the people. One one is those people elected by the nobles and aristocrats. The other one is those elected by the grassroots. Uh, and I am well aware that the number is imbalanced, but overall it is balanced because aristocrats and nobles are normally small in numbers, but they are very powerful. Their influence is impeccable. On the other hand, you have grassroots. They are very wimpy, but at the same time, there are just so many of them, large numbers. So you have large numbers, small power, and small number but large power. They are sort of balanced. And Machiavelli got me into thinking in modern general election, in democracy, that seems to be what's happening all the time, because in a modern democracy, every single person, no matter you are the lowest person in the society or the highest royal family, all of you could come out and campaign for an election. Like it or not, willy-nilly, people have to vote on you. Um, and yeah, sometimes we have leaders who are completely grassroots. We have candidates who are from the grassroots, and eventually they are elected into the parliament. On the other hand, it has never been lack of aristocrats, or at least their previous generations, their grandfathers, their great grandfathers were actually aristocrats, were actually royal family members. And now today, because of all those pedigree, they still come out to campaign and still interested to become a politician. I will come back and continue reading. Thus, the people quickly become more devoted to him. And the prince can win their affections in many ways, but as these vary according to the circumstances, one cannot give fixed rules, so I omit them. But I repeat, it is necessary for a prince to have the people friendly, otherwise he has no security and in adversity. Nabis, prince of the Spartans, sustained the attack of all Greece and of a victorious Roman army, and against them he defended his country and his government. And for the overcoming of this peril, it was only necessary for him to make himself secure against a few. But this would not have been sufficient had the people been hostile. And do not let anyone impugn this statement. With the trite proverb that he who builds on the people builds on the mud. For this is true when a private citizen makes a foundation there, and persuades himself that the people will free him when he is oppressed by his enemies or by the magistrates, wherein he would find himself very often deceived, as happened to the Gracchi in Rome and to Messer Giorgio Scali in Florence. But granted a prince who has established himself as above, who can command and is a man of courage, undismayed in adversity, who does not fail in other qualifications, and who, by his resolution and energy, keeps the whole people encouraged. Such a one will never find himself deceived in them, and will be shown that he has laid his foundations well. These principalities are liable to danger when they are passing from the civil to the absolute order of government, for such princes either rule personally or through magistrates. In the latter case, the government is weaker and more insecure because it rests entirely on the goodwill of those citizens who are raised to the magistracy, and who, especially in troubled times, can destroy the government with great ease, either by intrigue or open defiance. And the prince has not a chance amid tumults to exercise absolute authority, because the citizens and subjects, accustomed to receive orders from magistrates, are not of a mind to obey him amid these confusions. And there will always be in doubtful times a scarcity of men whom he can trust. Alright, I'll stop here. It's almost the end of chapter 9. I'll continue in another episode. Goodbye.